Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is March 19, 2024. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Also, want to thank the New York Finnegan's Wake Reading Group for introducing me to today's guest, Colin Capers. Colin, where in the heck you calling in from?
I'm in Bar Harbor. Well, actually, I'm in Mount Desert Island, Maine, which is best known for Bar Harbor and Acadia National Park. I'm on what we locals call the backside or the quiet side of the island in Seal Cove.
How cool is that? We call it Bahaba.
Yeah, that's true.
Colin, what is the best thing for a human being?
Oh, the best thing for a human being. Uh, well, I guess I would put that into two parts. The best thing for the human being themselves, and the best thing that human being can be for society, community, the planet, everyone else. Um, I think for me, the best thing for myself is I definitely subscribe to the sort of leave no trace ethic. Um, I think, I guess, as an educator, there have to be clearly some some thoughts about that in terms of I do want to leave positive traces with my students in terms of how they interact with the world. But in terms of leaving the world without having great ecological impact, I think is really important for the individual. And I guess that actually also speaks to what I think is important for the best thing for a human being in the world is to leave only positive effects on others around you. And if there are going to be succeeding generations, which I'm not convinced there need to be, but if there are going to be, leave them as best prepared to continue the good work, which I guess is a cliche phrase, but I'll
No,
leave it at
that
that for now.
sounds beautiful. Leave a positive effect on others. That's really good. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
I think I still like books. I'm getting podcasts recommended to me all the time, and I'm sure a lot of them are wonderful, but I haven't been able to get in the mode of listening to podcasts. Radio too. I was never much of a big fan of radio other than for music. I like to be able to like see the people that are talking,
Yeah.
So video is a great form for me, but um, books, love
W-
books.
Did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to, two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
I'd say it was all of those. My dad was a journalist when I was growing up. My mom was a librarian. Books were all around, not just with them, but with everybody on both sides of my family. Holidays involved, birthdays and Christmases and stuff involved the giving of books and music to each other, and then wandering off and absorbing ourselves in the new things we've been given. So there are always wonderful books around the house. They taught me at a young age to read, but I always loved it. I mean, I was really thirsty for it.
Colin, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, we talked about my being an educator and an artist, but in some ways, I think mostly I'm an archivist, and I know that you have that past as well. But the collecting of information and having it available, ready to hand, is a fantastic thing. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about how the internet has changed teaching. Is it's no longer necessary to remember things in the same way that it used to be, because those things are at our fingertips. It's more important, I think, to teach students skills of how to find quickly and accurately the best sources for what they're wanting to work with. Um, and so much of to me, the most interesting information has always been hard to find. Uh, my dad, when I was young, at first he was the main editor at a branch office of a small newspaper. And one of the things that he did there for a little bit was record reviews. The records would come in, and so he had some things that were hugely important records for me as a kid, like Tom Waits' first album, Closing Time, and Van Morrison's Into the Music, albums that quickly went out of print in the U.S. And by the time I was a teenager and wanting my own copies, I had to get them from the Netherlands, which was hard in those days. And so I have this sort of fear that the most amazing, important, exciting thing that's going to really blow my mind open is going to be out of print and gone. and I'm not going to be able to find it. Public libraries are great, but they need to cater to the tastes of what people in that area want. So things like Lamont Young records are not going to make the cut there. And so a lot of the things that I've always been looking for are hard to find. And so for me, it's important to have them close at hand. I think I'd verge on a hoarder in terms of books and digital media now. But
Well, that's
yeah.
interesting. You really anticipate a lot of where our discussion's going. Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Hmm. I think it's innate. I mean, historically, humans have always showed this desire to have places you can go that are repositories of great amounts of information, right? From the Library of Alexandria on, and even things like cave paintings, I would say, fall into that category, having these receptacles of the past that you can look to as reference. I mean, reference is a key part of it. But I do think that with the coming of the internet, we're now in a cycle of so much information all the time, and feeling like there is that like fear of missing out, I think, which is anticipated by the way I was talking about my feelings from things being out of print, which is something that young people have a hard time understanding, that things went out of print. Like I remember, actually, I think I probably spoke to you in the 80s on the phone when you were working for Zappa, because I would call the pumpkin number. And the idea of those archival recordings coming out or things being re-released was massive, and Frank was a pioneer with that, as I guess you were, as being part of that.
Well, no, I appreciate that. God, there's so many directions we can go, like Joyce, Zappa, and just Tom Waits, Van Morrison. So much you touch. Lamont Young, amazing. But do thoughts create emotions?
I think my gut reaction to that is, for me, it's more frequently the other way around. The
Yeah,
emotions create thoughts.
yeah.
I think that probably varies a lot from person to person. And I think, in terms of the way you framed that last question, I think some of that is innate and some of that has to do with the conditions in which you grow up and raise and what your schooling looks like. But for me, I
Yeah,
think emotions come first.
very good. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
I guess there's a cycle of pondering, research, more pondering.
Oh,
Um,
that's good. Pondering, research, more pondering, because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can
mhm.
humans can humans think without language?
I think that's a huge, huge question. My feeling about that has always been absolutely yes. When I was an undergraduate, I had a professor who did education and literature work, and the thought that humans could think without language, she actually found sort of terrifying, which shocked me when we had those conversations. Um, I think it's really hard to get there, though. As we get older, we close off those pathways. But I think when we're young, a lot of our thinking happens that way. Um, I had an experience a couple years ago where it was my first time in an isolation tank, which is something that I had been, wanting to do from like sixth grade when I read Altered States, and I became very interested in those. And they were passé for a long time, but now they're coming back into style. Although they're coming into style more as like a body centering thing than as like a mind excursion tool, as they were used as in the 60s and 70s. Um, And the hardest thing for me was getting past the point of thinking in words. I knew I wanted to get there. I'd been there clearly, like an adult person, I've been able to go to that place where I shuffle the words aside. But in the tank, it was hard. And it was basically just getting to that point where I was really conscious of language fracturing and words moving away and getting past that point when the session was up. And I have not yet been able to go back to sort of continue that work. But I think absolutely humans can think without words. And I think it's something to strive to be able to not necessarily do all the time, but to be able to weave in and out of that, I think is probably pretty key for having like a multiplicity of understandings and ways of interacting in the world.
Really good, Colin. You're really concise, and I appreciate how articulate you are. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think we like to think we're thinking beings primarily, but I think that we're primarily emotional
Yeah.
beings. I think a lot of the thinking that happens is how do we rationalize our innate feelings, um, or maybe not necessarily innate. They could be feelings that are entirely societal and would not be innate if it weren't for the effects that society had upon us. But I think I think a lot of the thinking is to explain the feeling.
Yeah, really good. Three things. There's a bumper sticker on a car in my street. It says, "Don't believe everything you think." And I'm like, well, you could say, "Don't believe everything you feel."
Absolutely.
and,
Yeah.
and believe is a key word there. And then Bridget Bardot says, "When I make love, I don't think." And it reminded me of your floating tank, isolation tank thing. Like people who meditate, they go, "Don't think about thinking." And it's like, Bridget Bardot's comment is like, good luck. How can you turn your brain off when you're doing one of the most sensuous things your body can participate in? Can you really literally just surrender to the sensualness of the feeling? But we as humans invent these words, feeling and thinking. So we think we can say one is more than the other when in essence they're so connected. It's hard because most people answer it, Colin, are we more thinking or feeling? They go, I think we're more feeling. that's
I think
pretty
I do that too.
that's pretty revealing right there. So here's two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
It's thinking a function of the soul. Hmm. I don't see that, but it could be. I'm skeptical of the word soul. It's not that I'm not, that I'm lacking in spirituality or that I don't believe that there's something that animates us or that is part of human experience that is mystical or beyond the physical processes. But I think thinking it's synapses. It's totally physics. It's the electricity in the brain. Yeah.
I love that you took that deep breath because that is an amazing thing that I like to have happen when people actually consciously take in a deep breath, because that's what these interviews are about, is that we're consciously there, present, thinking and feeling. So the second turn question is, can machines think?
It's a big one these days. Um, can they think now? Is there the possibility that they will at some point be able to think? I guess for me, the questions more turn upon, would we recognize what a machine thinking looks like?
Yeah.
It's like that Wittgensteinian thing about, if a lion spoke, would we understand that it was speaking?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, no,
Yeah,
that's
I
really
don't know.
good.
I don't know if we would ever be able to know that a machine
Yeah.
is thinking.
No, it's really good because you answered a question with the question. That's what this series is all about, is inventing new questions and metaphors. And this is a follow-up that I've just added on, because this is Turing asking. No, he's not asking a question. He's made a statement. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience.
Hmm.
So, I mean, he's saying it back then. So, who is the we there? What we want, the researchers or humans in general? What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. Just your take on that line from Turing. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the way that so many people frame discussions right now about artificial intelligence is informed by that. I mean, the whole field has his work as a foundation. Um, s- it's yeah. This is making me reminding me of the Douglas Adams books and the whole idea of we create the humans eventually create a machine to tell us the answer to the question of life, the universe, and everything, but we haven't understood what the question is. So when we get the answer 42, that doesn't make sense. So I think it's as much as there's a feedback loop there, right? Like the computer, it would be optimal from our point of view, from the way our brains function, for machines to be able to learn, but we need to be able to learn as well. And can we learn in the terms a machine would need to have like uh, a truly equal relationship?
Yeah.
Is for me a question.
Boy, that taught me a lot. Douglas Adams books basically tell us the answer, but we didn't know what the question was. Is that
Right. Yeah.
that is brilliant. Yeah, I actually saw that something the universe movie by him
Hmm.
once. And I thought this is really close to Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. The Hitchhiker's
It
Guide to
was
the Galaxy. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Did he
Yeah.
ever say anything about the wake? Has he ever
I don't know of him ever specifically talking about Joyce at all, but it
he
would not
must.
surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah, he must have. Because here's the other one. This is McLuhan. I'm going to tell you his quote. Then I'm going to tell you what I think it means. Doesn't mean it's right. And then I would like you to reflect on it. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. So,
Mhm.
what I think he's saying is the kid comes in from the cold and the parent goes, "Don't touch the stove, it will burn your hand." That's experience. The parent could go, "I'm going to teach you the dynamics of heat. If you get your hands really close to the stove and rub them, you can warm your hands up." That's called understanding. So I think Marshall's kind of saying we should have understanding shape our behavior, but experience more so shapes our behavior. So I can read the quote again, or you can comment on it as you think, All
Yeah. If you
right.
don't mind reading the quote again, that would be great. Thank you.
Because his wording is a little different than my bias in interpreting it. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior.
Yeah, this ties into. I know that you're interested in the idea of communicating the new, which McLuhan talks about. There's only a certain percentage of new information you can put in any sort of media interaction. Otherwise, it's going to turn people off. Right? It's going to
Yeah.
be too foreign for them, and it needs to be palatable so you can get the new information in. Um, yeah, I think experience is huge. In my experience, uh, you can't really learn something from having other people tell you it. I mean, something like math, yes, but something like the stove is going to burn you, or um, things like getting your heart broken for making poor decisions in romance, those are things that other people can tell you their experiences about, and you can comprehend them in some way. But until you experience that thing yourself, you haven't really learned that lesson. So I guess I would say that there are subcategories in terms of which things are going to be more biased towards the experience or more biased towards having someone relate the information to you. And it would be interesting to see. There would be a fun activity would be to sort of start to list what type of life experiences fit into each of those different categories.
Yeah. Yeah. Because T.S. Eliot says they had the experience but missed the meaning.
Mm-hmm.
But it's again, it's like, well, understanding and experience are like feeling and thinking again. It's like they're so interconnected. So do you more
Where's that Eliot quote from?
Don't know. I just love to quote. I love to ramble off Eliot quotes and make like I sound like I know what I'm talking about. But the other one is poetry can communicate before it's understood. Because there's your understand word. I mean,
right.
the wake, you reading the wake can communicate a lot before it's understood. If you're willing, but some people are like, yeah. So do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I would say that I more pursue meaning, but at the same time, I'm entirely skeptical that anything really has any meaning. It's all contextual. Meaning is only
That's
contextual,
good.
right? So I guess maybe I pursue context more than anything because I'm trying to.
Oh, that's even better. I pursue. See, you really get it, Colin. What I'm after is me and you psychoanalyzing the wording of the questions. So I like when people say, well, I don't pursue either of your choices. I pursue context, because that's really McLuhan-esque, that context, the environment is, it's like media ecology is an organism's relationship with its environment. That's context. So does the brain more? Oh, well, I just tell you where I got that was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He says that meaning tends to last and happiness doesn't tend to last long. So does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
It's fascinating. I guess for me, the thing that pops into my head is sort of a metaphor for that would be the idea of stone soup, right? So somebody comes to town and they don't have any food, and they convince everybody in the town to make this wonderful soup, and they're going to start it by providing the water and the first thing in it, which is a stone, and then people are going to come bring the other things, onions and carrots and other things to put in the soup. And so the soup is there, it's bubbling away, but it's not a soup yet. It's just hot water.
Yeah.
With a stone, which to me has the resonance as a Beckett there, right? And I've always imagined it as a kid as a big stone, but now I'm thinking of it as like one of the tiny sucking stones that's there. And the people putting all the things in it are the people that you interact with every day. The community structures that you interact with both by choice and not. And those are the things that make the soup. So in some sense, it's there bubbling away, but it's not soup.
Yeah.
Right. It's the things that then come to it that turn it into soup.
Yeah. It's really good. But is that a Beckett Motif? Is stone soup an old proverb or
Stone soups,
where
yeah, it's an old like folk tale.
folk tale?
So I
Yeah.
was relating it to to Beckett's use of stones in a lot of his work, and that's something that just happened to me right now. That's not a thought I'd ever had before.
Wow.
Combining those, yeah.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I'm gonna go with light. I think light.
Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools.
Sure.
Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Oh, I love that. The master's tools to dismantle their house. I mean, language is an old tool,
Yeah.
but I think it's a vital one there. But it's tricky that we see now a lot of the language that has been years used by the left being appropriated by the right and making I don't have a great example right to hand, but making some of the language that has tried to be progressive and tried to dismantle the master's house become almost meaningless. It's very much like the Debordian society of the spectacle, and the idea that the spectacle is always going to absorb anything that starts to make advances to bring down the spectacle or to subvert the spectacle. Um,
Say
you know,
that again. So that's Guy Debord said what?
Guy Debord's in the Society of the Spectacle, he talks about the fact that the spectacle, the all absorbing thing that is like capitalism wanting to take our attention, uh, any anything that arises that can subvert or fight against the spectacle is able to immediately absorb. Like an example would be a Che Guevara T-shirt, right? um, Che is subverted into nothing but a symbol that then you can buy and wear as a token of your revolutionary self, or maybe not even that.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Well, that's Zappa was the first. I mean, one of the first to say, hippies are made up from Madison Avenue.
yeah,
He was into the words freaks in LA, and that was
yeah, absolutely.
a form of hippies. But he was also seeing how they were cashing in and selling you bell-bottom jeans or whatever. So that's good what Guy Debord said. Yeah, the spectacle. That's really a good thing you taught me there too, man. Because yeah, so language was great because see, even though I said the word new, you knew you don't have to follow my wording on the questions. So language is a tool. That's good.
Yeah,
What
language is constantly renewing itself. I mean, so there are
Yeah,
like new forms
yeah,
of language. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's really good. And so oh well, no, I know what I was going to ask you, just an aside. DT's use of the word bloodbath the other day, your take, more metaphorical or more literal? And it's a hard question because am I saying, do you think his use
Right. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
more metaphorical, or did you take it metaphorically or literally? So it's really open wide. Just
I mean, trying to discern his intent and use of language is a zero sum game. I think you're not going to go anywhere with that. uh, yeah, I feel that, as with most things that he says, I feel they hit me literally.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. So what new toy do you suggest? You said tool, language, brilliant. What new toy do you suggest?
What new toy? Hmm. Well, this is it's a new and an old toy, and this is probably very particular about my brain. But I don't know if you can see here. I'm a big fan of Rubik's cubes. I've got this
Oh,
like Rubik's
good. I saw those. That's
cube.
funny because they
and
sold out.
and they keep making new ones.
Oh my God.
This one you need to warm it with your hands before the colors show up. So
Mm.
if you're using it, the colors start to come out, but once you stop, then they disappear again. Um, and there's another one that has each tile on it looks a different color from a different angle because of the way the lights hits it. They call it the Rubik's Impossible because even when it's solved, it doesn't look solved. There you can kind of see the colors
Yeah.
coming out a little
Wow.
bit there.
That's heavy.
And yeah, I think the Rubik's Cube is a fascinating toy, and I think Erno Rubik is a fascinating individual. Um, and the fact that they keep doing these new spins on these, I find really intriguing.
Yeah.
Um, it takes something that's hugely difficult, but also like compulsively fun,
Yeah.
and it's putting new. I mean, it's a spinning toy, and they keep putting new spins on it. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure ultimately what the Rubik's Cube gives us, but I think
Yeah.
that's part of what attracts me to it. Is it's
The mis-
tactile, it's
yeah,
immersive,
it's
it's sensual.
tactile and it's the mystery that do we have to have a purpose when we're playing? I mean, isn't that the
Yeah,
whole thing with play is that you don't
yeah,
have a purpose? I'm going to go out and play now. We didn't do that as kids. We just played.
yeah, yeah. And I don't like the solving the cube is not a hugely important part of it for me.
Yeah.
When I was younger, it was, but now it's not. It's like
Yeah. Yeah, you learned how to play as you got older. You learned how to play better.
definitely, yeah, yeah.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
uh, I try not to. I try not to go to bed when I'm worried.
Good.
Um, honestly, I don't. I don't worry a whole lot. Um, things are things. People are people. The world
Yeah.
does what happens. I try to do my best to make it, from my point of view, a better place.
Yeah.
But it's not my place to force what I think the world should be on people. It'll continue or it won't. Humans will continue
Yeah.
or they won't.
Yep.
Um,
So McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So,
mm.
Colin, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, we don't all. I mean, some of us don't. Uh, some of us, I think, are very attuned
Yeah.
to what is being broadcast
Yeah.
from anything. McLuhan talked about media, including things like clothes and tires, and anything that mediates between us and the world. As I think it should be discussed. Um, I think for a lot of people, and I think those examples actually speak to that. There's the a utilitarian aspect that gets in the way. If something that somebody has made doesn't seem like it's going to get a job done, then it's seen as a luxury item or a pastime or something frivolous. But what do you define as the getting the job done? Like, what is the job you want done?
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, I was in Paris and I went to this massive new Mark Rothko exhibition, which is the biggest collection at one time of his work since the 90s, I believe, at the Louis Vuitton Center. And pondering those large colored squares. I mean, his work, like, for me, that gets the job done. It's like that is But for many people, it's just like, oh, the cliche of my kid could do that, right?
Yeah. That's like Sun Ra. Guy goes backstage after a concert and he says, "My kid could do that." And Sun Ra goes, "But can he transcribe it?"
Yeah. I hadn't heard that. That's great. I like that.
Do artists have moral obligation?
A huge question. This is something I get into with my students all the time. I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. I think there are extremely compelling arguments that they do, and extremely compelling arguments that they don't.
Yeah.
And it's also really tricky in that morals are not, they're not universal.
Yeah.
As much as we or some people might like to think that. So an artist could think that their work is highly moral and have it be seen as intensely immoral and be accused of irresponsibility. It's a really tricky area, but it's one of the things I think about most all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it, Colin, that you're willing to say, "I don't know." People are ashamed. They're like, "Oh, you're trying to put me on the spot and trick me." No, I have welcomed. I welcome people saying I don't know, and I welcome people saying I can't answer that. So you are very articulate, concise, and I'm happy that you're able to feel comfortable say that. And so, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yeah, I knew that you ask this sometimes, and I don't have a lot of strong memories from my youth. And what ones I think I do have, I'm never really sure about because my parents are both storytellers, right? So
Yeah.
there are stories from my childhood that I tell, but I'm not sure that I remember them if I was just told them.
Yeah.
But that being said, like I'm thinking of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And there's a section where one of them is asking the other one, what's the first thing you remember this morning? And the other one says, no, that's not it. I don't remember. And the first one says, no. What's the first thing you remember after all the things you've forgotten? Right. So in terms of the first thing I remember, there's got to be one, right? But it's elusive to me.
Yeah.
I don't think I can answer that question, actually.
Yeah. So is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I guess I don't see it in those terms at all. I mean, that's a little too binary for me in
Yeah.
terms of thinking about memory. Memory is like it's a pool, is a pool,
Yeah.
a blessing or a curse. It can be either.
No, it's a fool is a great answer. And so tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
I'm gonna go here with my uncle, my mother's brother, who passed away about a year and a half ago. He was the person who turned me on to Joyce. Um, we had all of Joyce's books around the house. And interestingly, I was thinking about this earlier. I think the first Joyce book I read was actually Exiles, which is a strange one to start with.
Wow. And
But I was
that's
very into
not as, just to be clear, Colin, that's not as an assignment for high school or college. What's your uncle's name?
His name is Tom Heffernan.
Tom. That's
And, yeah.
Tom. That's Tom saying, "Hey, why don't you read this?"
No, Exiles wasn't even him. He would call me up on Bloomsday and he would read to me over the phone from Ulysses. Um, and so that was my first real exposure. And we had around the house.
Oh,
We had
how
all the
old are you when he's doing that?
young, 10, probably younger, maybe 8.
Yeah, so he's reading Ulysses over the phone to you on Bloomsday.
Yeah.
But that's pre or post exile?
That was pre. And
Pretty
you know, and
excellent.
yeah,
Wow.
so I really enjoyed that. And then it wasn't until I got a little bit, it was probably when I was around 11 that I started thinking like, oh, so because to me it was like these words from my uncle. And
Yeah.
then I started to think, okay, well, they're not his words, they're coming from this other person
Yeah.
that is important to him. And so I like looked around our house at the Joyce books, and I picked Exiles because, well, it was thinner than Ulysses Finnegan's Wake, but it was a play, and I was really into
Yeah.
plays at that point. Um, I can't say it did a lot for me. I can't say I really understood much about it. It didn't
Uh,
make me want to immediately go out and read more, but it is
yeah.
something that I've returned to, and it is interesting as a place to start from. Then I had to read Dubliners. That was the first choice I was assigned in school was Dubliners,
In high
and
school or college.
in high school, yeah.
But let's
And
go
I was
back.
in general resistant.
Let's go back to Joyce
I
and
was in
Wong.
general resistant to what I.
You
Yeah,
were
yeah.
okay. But let's go back. What did Tom mainly teach you? What did you get from Tom? You know, he's reading you this over the phone. I mean, what's the
Yeah.
main sort of influence he had on you?
Well, the main influence that he had on me, I would say, was not directly. I mean, he turned me on to Joyce, and that was huge. But I think the main influence he had on me was more when we would be in person and we would go for walks together, and he taught me the importance of observing everything around you in as great
Yeah,
detail as possible. That was really the big thing from Tom, I think.
yeah.
And in
Observing.
the context, first in the context of being a writer or an actor, but also in the context of being a human being, being a
Yeah,
person in the world.
yeah. That's good. Now, outside your immediate family, same question.
There are two people that jump into my mind, and they're from different realms. One of them is outside my immediate family, but somebody that I have had direct interaction with, and that was uh, one of my professors, professor of philosophy when I did undergraduate and graduate school, John Bisvader. And the other person is Bob Dylan. Um,
So,
uh,
would you mainly get from John and would you mainly get from Bob?
John taught me a lot about being in the world.
Wow.
Part of that was through the different philosophers we looked at, and Wittgenstein was a big one for John. Is a big one for John,
Yeah.
and a lot of philosophy of language. John Searle and others, uh, Derrida, but also, as the years went on and we became friends, and in fact, he and I ended up teaching several times a philosophy at the movies class together, and it was, being able to co-teach with one of my main mentors was a huge thing for me. But just being friends with him in just his manner of being in the world
Yeah.
taught me a lot, like thoughtfulness,
Yeah.
being at ease, carefully looking again. Um, but in a different way. Tom taught me about looking at qualities of light and looking at the blades of grass, and with John it was more about the observing of body language and mental states, and um
Yeah.
yeah.
It sounds like, Colin, just to interrupt, it sounds like it's the main thing I often understand that people got from working with Frank Zappa is he brought out of you something you didn't know was in you. And in both of those, you said Tom and John was you taught being in the world,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
like, it's like, well, could you give me some specifics? It's like, yeah, the same thing, just how to be in the world.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So, would you mainly get from Dylan, or you still get?
Oh, I'm still getting from Dylan. My partner Gabby and I joke all the time that her her least favorite sentence to hear come out of my mouth is, "They just announced the new Bob Dylan box set." um, yeah, and I think with him, obviously the stuff with like his use of words in like radically different ways, which he shares with Joyce.
Yeah.
Um, but also in like, I think, one of the things that some people don't like about him, which is one of the things I truly cherish, is how he performs the songs differently
Yeah.
all the time. People
Yeah.
get upset that the song doesn't sound like it did on the record. Well, just listen
Yeah.
to the record, like he's
Yeah.
constantly reinterpreting. It's keeping it alive for him. It's
Yeah.
keeping it alive for the audience. He's bringing something new out all the time. And that
Yeah.
commitment on his part to like maintaining his own interest in what he's doing, um, I find really key.
It's huge.
Um, yeah. And you find that like in his interviews, especially the earlier
Oh, yeah.
ones, but the playfulness that he shared with John and some of the other Beatles, that playfulness of
Oh, yeah.
language and that rapport in the public setting, right?
Oh, yeah. But that's what Steely Dan opened for Zappa, and they would go, "Dude, we have to play the songs like they are on the album, don't you?" And he goes, "No." And so you don't know if Steely Dan was catering to their record company's needs or their thought that way we'll want to play them because they want the kids to sing along.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting because Frank would mix it up and play it differently than on the album, but
Sure.
so that was good. I like what you said. Again, we could do hours on Dylan. So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
I was raised Unitarian Universalist. My dad had been raised Protestant, my mom Roman Catholic. My mom's parents were both very religious. Um, dad dad's parents not evidently much so, and he was not. So the Unitarianism was
Yeah.
her part, and she actually she ran the church school program there, so it was a big part of our lives. Um,
Do you pray?
I do not.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
uh, I don't know. Psych.
Psyche?
Yeah, like in that, not like, yeah, not like psyche, but in that sense of like to psych you out, like not like, oh, joke, like
Not.
like you didn't believe me, ha, here I am.
Oh, psych. I get it now.
Yeah,
Psych. Got
yeah.
you. Um, Colin, do evil people exist or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I have a lot of problems with the word evil, actually. Yeah, I don't really believe in good or evil. I guess this comes back to the contextual thing, right? And those
Yeah.
being binaries. Um, but I think if I understand the sense of how you're using that word, which I think I do, I guess I would lean more towards the second. It is the horror of some aspects of being human that comes out in those people. Maybe it doesn't use them, but that comes out in them. It's not innately the people.
Yeah. Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language breaks down, when language doesn't work?
Yeah, that's tough. And I think part of what makes it tough is people have so much faith in language. Um,
Yeah.
it's just a system, like any other system. It it fails, it breaks down, it has problems, it has things that don't work well about it, and it's fun to play games with. It's so fun to play games with, but when there are real things at stake, it's really hard. Um, yeah, and that's another. I don't know. I have yet to find anything like that consistently works across different contexts for when language breaks down. I think the best you can do is, in an individual situation, try to be as present as possible, as open and receptive as possible. Acknowledge, like, and being able to acknowledge
Yeah.
that breakdown, and that, there's a point where you need to stop and take some time maybe and give it another shot.
Yeah, it leads perfectly into that. Really good strategies there, all brilliant. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Mhm.
Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a
Mhm.
lot of thoughts, but the basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think, across the board, I mean, it's true, like literally with other humans that you have antagonistic relationships with, but in terms of your own personal demons or failings, it's important to acknowledge them, but it does give them strength as
Yeah.
well. Um, yeah, this may be somewhat tangential, but I'll give you a quote here that has been important for me, and in terms of being a frequently tangential person. This is from Edward Albee's Zoo Story. His character Jerry, when trying to explain why his perambulations for the afternoon have taken their course before he runs into Peter, a stranger sitting on a park bench in New York. He says, sometimes you need to go a long distance out of your way in order to return a short distance correctly.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's been huge for me,
Yeah.
that thought. So I'm thinking about in Hollywood, there's a notion, and I can't remember who was the first person that articulated this, but he was writing about the portrayal of um, Arabic peoples in Hollywood films, um, and how after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was this like villain hole in
Yeah.
cinema, right? We didn't have that long-term enemy anymore, and so most Hollywood filmmakers then sort of conveniently slotted Arabs, Muslims, Middle Eastern people into that role.
Yeah.
Now Russia's making a comeback, with Putin, of course, but that idea that there needs to be an enemy. Here's another anecdote about so Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, not long before he passed, he was talking with people close to him and that were involved in the making of the ongoing Star Trek series, and the fact that he thought they'd gone to a point in the future far enough that any new series that took place further in the future would have to take place in the context of galactic peace,
Yeah.
right? And nobody knew what to do with that. So the next show that happened after he died was Enterprise, which is where they went back earlier in time, pre the first series, to a time that was like more barbaric. Because I mean, people are taught in Hollywood filmmaking, that McPhee book story and other things like that. You're taught you need to have this conflict, and I'm not convinced that
Yeah.
that's the case, where that conflict always needs to be your entire life is at stake, or the entire existence of humanity is at stake. The Those things that are at stake can be much smaller and more nuanced. Um, I don't really think I have any
No,
enemies.
that you
I could
covered.
be wrong. Maybe somebody's going to watch this and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm your enemy." But,
No,
yeah, so
you
I,
put.
I haven't put a lot of thought into how to deal
Yeah,
with them yet.
you covered a lot there, and you taught me a lot. That was really, really strong. The to take it into Hollywood screenwriting is really good, and it's because Writer's Journey by whatever his name is. He's basically a Joseph Campbell dude who
Absolutely.
applied Campbell to Hollywood screenwriting. And that's right when Lucas was doing that. And he basically got sort of scolded for doing that. And Christopher Vogler is his name. Check out especially check out Writer's Journey, the second edition with the intro where he says he got scolded. But it is another thing. I'm going to send you my essay I just wrote, Can Arts Stop War? And it's basically.
Oh, actually, I found it. I started reading it the other day. I found it from your website. I haven't.
Yeah. But it is interesting because if you study Maria Gombudas and then Rianne Eisler, Chalice and the Blade, that there might have been cultures where there was no warfare, and everybody thinks, no, we're hardwired to be have warfare.
Yeah.
And so that was beautiful. That Roddenberry says, no, we must have the context move to a galactic, no war space, no conflict space. It is conflict. The human condition is a huge thing I love to study. But this is deep what you said, because it kind of leads into Nassim Taleb saying games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. In fact, Gregory Bateson said, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, woe is me, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts. You can go wherever you want, but a basic question is, does punishment work?
I think it depends on for whom the crime and the punishment. There's a lot of contextuality there. If a kid steals a cookie and he gets a spanking, a good chance that's going to work. If you look at something like the U.S. prison system, though, and the reasons people end up there that are, I don't think that kind of, or like corporal punishment, I don't see that as, what does it mean for that to work, right? Okay, the person's gone. Is that work? I don't know.
Well, let me give you a what if.
Colin. Okay.
If Trump gets thrown in jail, can't run for president, writes a book and says, I'm sorry I did wrong, would you forgive him?
Not up to me to forgive him.
Very good. 99.9% go, no way, I wouldn't believe him. But it is interesting, as Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the smell the flower releases when the foot steps on it.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Isn't forgiving, and the other word that's huge is accountability. Oh, you got to be accountable. And I was quite amazed, Biden says, hey, I shouldn't have used that word in the speech the other day. Hey, he can say, he failed. He can own it, own up to it. Zappa said it best, I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure. So Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin.
The Volta Theater.
Yeah, Volta Theater. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? And years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
That's a great question. And it brings me back to my mentor, John Visvader, who, when asked in a beautiful spring day in Maine, after a hard winter, if we could have class outside, He said, as a philosopher, it doesn't make sense to me to have class outside. You get outside and you're like, look around and you think, why do we need to talk about any of this stuff? Let's just be here in nature, right?
Just be here now. Yeah.
Right. Um, yeah, I was thinking about that a lot actually when I was in France traveling with students and going to different museums, and discussions that we would have about representational art versus non-representational art.
Yeah.
And for me, there's not a whole lot of interest in looking at a realistic still life or a painting of a field of cows. Obviously, there are things like the way that Vermeer uses light. I love Vermeer.
Yeah.
But I definitely am more drawn to more abstract art. And I think part of it is that, like, and I'm definitely, one of the reasons I'm interested in experimental cinema is I'm interested in a cinema that is less human focused, right?
Yeah.
That is trying to look at the world like either like directly through consciousness or dwelling on, you know, other aspects of the world, but that decenters the human.
Yeah.
And in terms of film, like, I think, you know, the biopic is probably one of the least interesting sorts of filmmaking. Anything that's sort of based on a true story, I
Yeah.
would much rather read firsthand accounts than see some sort of reenactment of. I don't relate to that interest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. So walk us through your tipping point, you know, to become an artist and then become an educator. So, you know, you're raised with these great parents who are exposing you to the arts and literature, but you're reading, your uncle's reading you Ulysses at 10. That's amazing. You're in deep in the swamp, knee deep in the swamp muck of all this. Where did you go? Oh, I can do that. Where's your tipping point to be an artist? Like, I can do that. Was it first writing or picking up a video camera or, you know, pursuing some medium of art? And then when was the tipping point to say, well, I can be an educator?
It was first acting, actually. Yeah, I had a real love of acting when I was younger. And I think a lot of it had to do with the taking on, the becoming of somebody else. You know,
Yeah.
I was not, particularly comfortable with myself as a young person, and that liberation of being able to be another person, I just found like a drug, really,
Yeah.
really exciting. Um, and then from there, yeah, it moved probably into writing. Had been a sort of interest earlier, but then like the idea that I could not only take on these other people, but I could author other people.
Yeah.
But it was really, yeah, it was video. The first time that I really played with video camera, I had some minor experience when I was younger. I had some friends. I know you're into the pixel vision stuff, which is fantastic. I love keeping that alive. I had some friends who had a couple of those cameras when I was a kid, and then I had a friend when I was in my late teens who had been to NYU Film School, and he had one. And so I played around a little bit with those. And I had a friend who's a German friend whose father was an engineer, and he had a 60 millimeter camera. And we would spend a lot of time building models and blowing them up. So my first sort of career desire was to be a pyrotechnics expert in Hollywood.
Yeah. Was that a Bolex?
It was a Bolex, yep.
Yeah. Did you see, I just got to interject. Did you see the movie Beyond the Bolex?
I have not seen it yet. No.
You know about it.
I did. I read about it, but I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's mind-blowing because this woman spent 16 years making it, and she goes up to her film teacher and goes, "Oh, I'm going to make a film on my godfather. He invented the Bolex." And the teacher went, "What?" and the dude actually made experimental films with the invention.
That's awesome. Yeah,
So
no, I'm excited to do
anyways,
that.
Yes, so this is great. You're blowing up things, and you're playing with the video camera, then a 16 millimeter camera. Then what happens then? Where is it like, oh, I can, I can
It was,
do this. Yeah.
it was when I was in college, and we had video cameras that we could check out from the library, and so I would bring one home for a weekend, and I had a friend, Stephanie, that she and I would, shoot interview footage or just wander around and shoot random footage. And I became really interested early on in the stuff that was not what we intended to be shooting. Like if we left the camera on by accident, or you're moving,
Yeah.
that you're going to turn the camera off, and so you're moving it away, and you get that like wonderful like slide where things are blurry. It wasn't
Random stuff.
actually until, say again.
The random stuff.
The
Yeah.
random stuff. Yeah. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I came across Rose Hobart, the Joseph Cornell film. I was familiar with
Yeah.
his boxes, but
Yeah.
the found footage stuff was definitely something I was thinking in those ways without knowing it at that point. And I became very interested in layering footage and doing superimpositions, which we didn't have at school. We didn't have the technology for at that point. So basically I would edit some footage and project it on a TV screen with other footage playing on it, and then shoot that on another camera.
Yeah.
So yeah, when digital editing became possible, I was like, oh yeah, this makes the stuff I've been trying to do so much easier. But yeah, I'm definitely interested and I definitely see the way that I build my work is inspired by the wake, in that I will have recognizable images and sort of structures in my head that then I add to and I build on, and I make more and more obscure while building up more possible readings, because the human brain is going to be seeking something recognizable, and the eye is always going to be trying to pull from this like amorphous, massive, kaleidoscopic imagery something that makes meaning for the viewer.
Yeah, it's like Colin. I wanted to, as soon as I started seeing Bruce Conner films, probably I said, I want to start a college called School of Found Footage, and I'd have Bruce Conner and Craig Baldwin be the professors.
That would be
and I mean,
yeah,
it is endless. I mean, it's really, this whole idea of found footage. So let's stay on that for a second. As a filmmaker, a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker.
yeah.
Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're making one of your, let's just say, experimental videos or experimental film pieces, not so much for an assignment or a commission, when you're just making a Colin video, what role does intention play in your creative process?
Well, there's a couple parts of that. I guess so you started by asking the framing of both the Kubrick quote and the screenwriting teacher quote have to do with the audiences being able to perceive the intention. And for me, that's not important at all.
Yeah.
It is important to me, like, that there is intention there. I don't necessarily know why. And part of the joy for me in the work is when I am intending to do something and it goes wrong. Something unpredictable happens that is better than what I was imagining. Right.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's important that I have the intention so it can be thwarted.
Oh, it can be thwarted. But this is funny because you're a super intelligent guy, and I appreciate you talking with me because you're also a good listener, because no one ever dissects the wording on that. The next question is, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your audience when you're making that video?
I don't think about the audience when I make the work.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I don't know what just popped into my head, like Walter Murch puts, little tiny paper figures on his editing screen, so he has like a sense of the size of the screen and in the people to scale what it's going to look like in the theater. But part of that is because I think a lot about the audience when the piece is done. Like, it's really important to me to like watch my pieces with an audience and talk with them and see like what their experience has been. Like, I
Yeah.
want their experience to be free from my intention. But it's fascinating to see sometimes aspects of my intentions that I think have been totally obscured, or I think have like gone, or I had lost as part of my intention. Sometimes people will pick them up really clearly. A colleague of mine who's a wonderful filmmaker in her own right, Nancy Andrews, after watching a film of mine at one point, or a video piece of mine that had very clearly in my mind started as a science fiction piece, but had gotten, as far as I understood it, completely far from that. When she saw the finished project, she immediately said, "Oh, you didn't tell me this was a science fiction movie." And it blew me away. I was aghast at that. So I like the work to function sort of as a Rorschach test. So it's fascinating to me to have those interactions with people. So I do think a lot about the audience at that point. And I guess it's not fair to say I don't totally think about the audience when I'm making something, because I think about past experiences. I don't think about the current piece and necessarily, but I think about past pieces. And I guess that probably subconsciously affects my choices in any current piece I'm working on.
Yeah. A couple things you touched on with Nancy's comment. You don't have to, in the experimental film world, so much go, here's a blurb, here's a line. Like, the beauty of Ann Arbor now going on, I'm going to it next week in its 63rd year, is for 40 years there were not blurbs that told you what you were seeing. And I go, don't do that. And I hate that in a way, because when we watch a video at home, my wife is, let me see the box, which she wants to read what we're seeing. And that we grew up with TV Guide. There's a one-liner there. You're being told what you're being supposed to see. And so that was interesting. Well, you didn't tell me it was supposed to be sci-fi.
Right.
Wait, am I supposed to, and that's just sort of like the whatever is the form and content. It's the form of movies. It's just a form of a book. When you read a book, you expect it to do what other books have done. That's why when you say Finnegan's Wake is unreadable, it's like, well, what's the point? I'm supposed to, or like, Salvador Dali saying, watch movies with your eyes shut. And then, the ultimate film experience, I thought of after going to Ann Arbor for so many years, I thought Derek Jarman's Blue would be the ultimate experimental film experience. That's sitting and staring at blue for 90 minutes. It didn't do it, but I mean, I still love the fact that he did it. And you go to a theater and you stare at blue for 90 minutes. Again, when there's anticipation, like if I just went, oh, here's a film, I'm going to go to it, and then I stared at it, it would have been a different experience. But I went there with the ammunition of my pastness. But I wanted to go back to this thwarted thing for a second. If things go wrong, it's unpredictable. So it can be thwarted. You want to give it that. And it reminded me of Buñuel said, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when I claim they found it. Most people go, oh, I agree with that. And one person said, no, that's bullshit, because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So I morphed it into this question. the cliche goes, the journey's more important than the destination. And why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey's more important? So really what I'm trying to get is people go, it's not important, but they think, oh no, we have to be focused. You have to have intention. So then if you learn about the flaneurs in
Yeah.
20s in Paris, you know, Joyce is and whoever else is there changing the world forever, and they're just sitting at coffee houses doing nothing and finding epiphanies in everydayness. So it's like like setting that up there. If did they know they were flaneurs and they were psychogeography, or they just sort of discovered that by being slackers, you know? You know, so that's the funny thing is like you almost have too much knowledge, not you, but one could say I have too much knowledge of that wanting to be thwarted. Like how do you like that's like even
That's a great observation. Yeah.
because I'm the same way, you know. I mean, Cage and you know, a lot of the surrealists, the Dada, and then Cage and the Exquisite Corpse, they were all like saying, no, we know that randomness is important.
Sure.
But now that you're conscious of it, isn't that being conscious of it? It's like
actually that's
yeah, go ahead.
it's making me think of Cage's books on working through Finnegan's Wake, where he's taking like little bite-sized chunks and then arranging them around Joyce's name to make them sort of like kind of haiku-like bits that were more digestible to him.
Yeah.
There's
never ending. It's never, you can never stop. You can always find some way to flip something into its opposite and go for the round. It was I worked for George Carlin, and we got a flyer in the mail, and it said, it sounded like something Carlin would say. He says, I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like something he would say.
So then McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. Like knife and fork extends our teeth, the shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid, and maybe even non-tangible, say religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What does the moving image camera extend for you? What humanness? Whether it's a 16 millimeter or a video camera, what humanness does the moving image camera extend?
That's a beautiful question. It's been a while in my personal practice since I have thought of the camera as a discrete unit. I definitely think of the camera and the digital editing process is all one thing.
Yeah.
And to me, I think what I imagine it as is an extension. It's a way of directly pulling consciousness out.
Yeah.
So rather than seeing the camera as something that that mediates in terms of bringing things into me,
Yeah.
I actually see it as part of a process of pulling things out.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah.
But I definitely am thinking, I'm thinking of Buster Keaton now, and all of those great like Russian posters of Keaton as a camera, and the way that that it those I think really capture that idea of the camera as an extension of the human form.
Yeah.
And Keaton as a physical comedian who was so aware of the technical processes.
Amazing you said Keaton, because you brought up Beckett earlier. Have you seen a
Yeah.
documentary by Ross Lippman called Not Film?
Not film. I have. Yeah. Yeah. It's
That
a brilliant
is
piece.
so amazing. That first opening scene to edit, Keaton, man with the moving camera, and newsreel footage. So it's just the perfect montage. There's seamless that you can, unless you know Keaton and know man with the moving camera, it's just seamless.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. And it is, Keaton was a master. And the funniest thing in the film is he's saying to Beckett, "Why do you want to film the back of my head? I'm a movie star." But he was not a movie star then. And then he goes to Cannes Film Festival and everybody's praised him. He says, "Well, it's not that bad of a movie if they still like me."
Yeah. Yeah. He was working in like a magic club at that point that Orson Welles was at.
Yeah.
Orson was coming up and Keaton was way down.
Wow.
But I love the photos of Beckett and Keaton sitting together on the set. They both look utterly miserable.
Oh God, that is so. So Peter Greenway said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers.
Yeah, so I love that.
Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? Like if me and you watch Tony Conrad's The Flicker, it's not storytelling per se. It's not narrative cinema per se, but we could have a story go through our heads.
Absolutely.
But how do you differentiate that? I mean, it's sort of a stupid question. I really am dire need to frame it better. But are these experimentalists doing storytelling a different way or doing something completely different?
I think that depends a lot on the artist. And some of it is in their intention. Some of it is in the reception from the audience. Yeah, like Brackage, for example, no. I was going to say that I don't think that he thought in those ways, but he definitely, if you look at the earlier work where he's using more human forms and things like Window, Water, Baby, Moving, I mean, he's aware of story there. And I think some of the titles of later pieces like Black Ice, that's telling a story from his perspective, I think.
Oh, and he's totally, the other thing about Brackage is he's totally he's trying to make Gertrude Stein and Pound into experimental film.
Yeah.
Interesting that you brought him up because, but there's one other thing I'll just insert is Andrew Norin said, if you put one frame after another, which is cinema, that is linear storytelling. It doesn't matter if it's abstract or not, but it is. We know, both being curators, that if you just show people 90 minutes of abstract cinema, they're going to, what the fuck was that? They don't have a reference unless they're tweaked, experimental film fans. They're like, oh, wow, that was cool. But there's a fine line in convincing someone that this cinema is worthy of sitting through and wait a minute, there's not, it's like all I'm seeing is telephone wires and flowers in a garden.
But for those of us who go deep there, I mean, there's, I think, a lack of, like, I never had resistance. I mean, did you have resistance at any point where you're like, I need to be like convinced, like getting a taste for whiskey or something when you're young? No, we saw experimental films and we're like, yeah, I'm down. I am down there for it.
Yeah.
Give me more.
Yeah. It is an interesting thing how you get convinced. It's just like how you convince anyone to get into The Wake. Yeah, especially if they've already gotten into Ulysses. They're like, wow, he went a little too far, and, then, I used to tell people if they were coming to town to show their films, and I'm trying to encourage them to get people to the theater, I say, just say it's a cross between John Waters and David Lynch. If normal people don't have a reference to experimental film, they just don't. True. And so how do you say, well, it's non-narrative. Well, what do you mean non-narrative? What's the point? That's all I've gone to cinema for was narrative. So it's sort of, maybe the question really is, are we hardwired to be storytellers and story receivers, or is it something that humans invented?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up earlier when you were talking about like violence. So, and people saying like violence and murder and warfare are hardwired into humans.
Yeah.
Another thing people say all the time, that
Yeah.
we are hardwired to tell stories and to want stories. And I don't think that I agree with that. And I think it's really important to be skeptical of stories because they can trap us, right? We have certain ideas of what it is to be a human, what it is to be a hero, what it is to do the right thing. And those can be really helpful, but they can also limit our thinking about doing
Yeah.
things that have not been done.
So,
You know,
Colin, just to be clear, are you saying, just by saying that, you're kind of edging that storytelling is invented more so than being hardwired?
yeah,
Is You are? Yeah, I see.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I am. I've got, you made me think of, there were two Greenaway quotes that I wanted to bring up. One is, so he talked about that film has yet to have their James Joyce, right? There is not yet somebody who has come along who can
I
do a
love
film with
Wait,
with
I
delivery.
know that quote as, I might have it wrong, or I saw him speak live once 25 years ago, and he said, if Finnegan's Wake is the pinnacle of literature, no cinema has come close to it. But
Oh,
you're saying, if you find that quote, he says it in
yeah,
Joyce. Yeah, I would love to.
yeah. I'll find that.
Joyce.
It's a written
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah.
Um, but he also said, and I was talking about this the other day. He gave a talk, "Cinema is Dead, Long Live Cinema,"
Yeah.
in which he claims that cinema died on the day, and I think it was 1982 when the remote control was first
Yeah.
introduced to households in the U.S. Right,
Yeah.
and that our having that control over it killed the medium,
Yeah.
which I think is fascinating. You know, at the time, I was right along with that, but as time goes on, I don't see it as clear cut as that. And I'm thinking about the Wake in terms of the way that we do readings of the Wake, you know, a page or two at a time, and that's almost like, you know, having a remote control. Nobody's going to read it
Yeah.
all the way through in one go.
Yeah.
And why should we privilege that idea that cinema needs to be like a movie needs to be seen whole like that?
Yeah.
One of my interests, you know, so I mentioned Lamont Young earlier. One of my big interests is durational art, and so
Yeah.
some of the films I really love are like Bellatar, Satan Tango. There's uh, an Argentine film from a couple years ago called La Flor that's about 15 hours long, and I use these in classes sometimes, and I tell students it's okay to fall asleep, which is sort of shocking
Totally.
for them. But I'm like, no, this is you're in this thing. You're going to fall asleep. You're going to come back out of it. That will be part of the experience. You know, the films are like David Lynch says, I love film because I like to dream in the dark.
Yeah.
The way that they operate on our subconscious is as interesting to me as the way they operate on our consciousness.
Let me jump in there because that's huge in my thing. Durational cinema. So that's what Harry Smith learned from Bruno, that the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then Yoko Ono says, if you dream a dream alone, it's a dream, but if you dream a dream with other people, it's reality.
Yep.
So like, war is over if we can imagine.
If we want it, yeah.
If you want it. But have you ever seen The Clock by Christian?
I have.
How many hours did you watch?
Well, I've seen all of it over 4 different viewings, but the longest I did a stretch was 10 hours.
Wow, in a gallery, not on a home screen.
Yeah, in a gallery. I did 10 hours at the Pompidou in Paris, and I did 10 hours at the Museum of Modern Art in Quebec City. And then I finished off the hours that I had missed at in Boston.
Amazing. Yeah. I think that Zadie Smith's review of The Clock is one of the closest things to reading Finnegan's Wake. Her review. But do you know Christian Marclay?
Do I know his work?
No, do you know him?
I don't know him. No.
I'm dying to interview him. I would love,
Yeah.
you know,
He is.
that New York article claims he kind of went nuts editing the clock.
Yeah. Even though he had a team that he was working with.
Yeah.
I first came across him on a television show in the 80s, Night Music, hosted by David
Yeah.
Sanborn.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which was an amazing thing. I was living in Connecticut at the time. I was in my late teens, and that was an amazing show. It was on at like 2 a.m. But
Oh, it's huge. Every episode is
yeah. In
monumental.
fact, I want to say, looking at the people that you've interviewed in this program, it's an honor to be in amongst them, and I'm really pleased that you had Artist the Spoon Man on in November, who I first discovered through Night Music. An amazing guy. I loved the conversation with Artist.
He was, just to have Frank Zappa say to you, "You don't have a soul out bone in your body." I mean, that's so much better comment than all the great musicians Frank's had to get that one on the side. And, Spoon Man, I was lucky that was really beautiful what he did. But this whole thing, durational cinema, is amazing. Like, it's okay to fall asleep. People don't realize that. That's pretty intense. We went so many layers there off of Greenaway, and it is this whole thing about storytelling. I wanted to return to that for a second because Hollis Frampton said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. So can you forget to die?
Can you read the quote one more time?
Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. That's sort of cobbled together. There's two parts that are actual Hollis Frampton's quotes, but I got it from someone else who put them together. But he basically, and that's what Hollis said, that this storytelling urge, this narrative urge, is born something within our like innate spirit because we're waiting to die. So then I added the question, can you forget to die?
Yeah. Huh. I don't. Yeah. I mean, my gut response is no, but I think I would need to think through that more about possible ways of hearing or understanding that, what it would mean to forget to
Well, it's
die.
interesting, Colin, because it's back to this thing. That's the most disturbing question, or the most perplexing question I've come up with in the last, I don't know, I didn't come up with it, I got it from somewhere, but that people don't know if they should take it literally or metaphorically. See, often they ask me, "Oh, do you mean can I forget that I'm going to die?"
Right.
And so it is that the kind of thing is the user as the content. I put it into your court, and you can put it into either metaphorical or literal terms. So that's why I think it's hard for people to understand, because words are so literal, even though they're metaphorical, that everybody thinks they are going to die. They don't have a choice. No, you're going to die. How can you forget to die? Because that's all anybody knows that for sure is going to happen.
And my immediate response to is, can we forget that we're going to die? Is, would one want to forget that they're going to die? I think it's important to be aware.
That's another one. I often get that people, no, they forgot to live.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Can we forget to die? I do think, though, that Frampton, that pairing of those two Frampton quotes, is somewhat compelling to me in terms of my claim earlier that storytelling is not innate. That framing of it is what we do to fill the space before death is not how he put it, but that's sort of the way I'm hearing it right
Well,
now.
it's almost, he is implying
Yeah.
it's innate by saying by saying those terms, and it could be the way the person put them together. I mean, to take what he said and read, I've never gone back and found out exactly. I mean, I bet you we could Google it, but uh is born among the animal necessities, that implies innate, of the spirit, because we're waiting to die. So adding
Right.
animal necessities with spirit, that's
With
a
spirit.
little, isn't that contradictory? Because you don't have spirit in you innately, or though, maybe he did. Yeah, the real funny thing is, you ever seen that film? It's Green. What's it called? By Hollis. It's a 9-minute film, and it has the oldest footage of Finnegan's Wake funeral song ever. Have you ever seen this film? It's on YouTube.
Don't
It's
think I have seen it.
Yeah, it's an old computer screen with green type, and then you
Okay.
cut to this found footage of some filmmaker 120 years ago play acting filming a play of a guy's being put into a coffin, and they're having a party, and then he wakes up and they're like, "No, you're supposed to be dead." And they
Oh no, I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, because
All right.
I've kind of made a list of all the experimental filmmakers who have been influenced by Finnegan's Wake.
Sure. Yeah.
Hollis and George Landau,
Mary Ellen Butte, of course.
Mary Ellen Butte, that's huge. And then there's some others I can't think of right off the top of my head, but Peter Greenaway. But
Lynn Sachs. Has she been
Lynn
influenced?
Sachs would be very interesting. I've interviewed her twice. I don't know if we've even talked about that.
I
That's
knew that
really,
you had interviewed her. I feel like that
yeah.
would make sense.
But let's go to this word identity you brought up, because one thing I would like to propose, Colin, is that we do a part 2 or 3, because we've only gotten through a third, barely a third of the questions, and it would be great to continue it.
Sounds good to me.
Maybe 4-6 months down the line, book another one for a part 2. But
Sure.
I would love to, since you brought up this word identity, and then you drew it back to the word, are we hardwired for violence? And both Krishnamurti and McLuhan say that violence is the human search for identity.
Mm.
And I'm curious your thought of that, because, a lot of this is about identity. Me and you have this catalog, this Rolodex of things that we've learned, and we can exchange them with language. And then how much is it defining who we are? Or as Alan Watts says, if you figure out who you are, you're fucked. But that's why I asked that one question in the pre statement before these interviews. I say, if I was at a party and I asked you, what do you do? What do you usually say? Say, hey, I'm an educator, a filmmaker, or whatever. Duchamp said, what do you do? And he goes, I'm a breather. I said, hey, dude, I'm a breather too. We have something in common.
Yeah.
And then people often misconstrue and they go, breeder or breather?
Oh, yeah.
But any thoughts on this,
That is funny.
the search for identity? Human search for identity. Violence is the human search for identity. Any comments on that?
Yeah. It seems to me that the human search for identity frequently becomes or entails violence. But I don't think that I would agree that
Yeah.
violence is that human search. I
Yeah.
think that there are many ways to search for identity. And in terms of, some of the other stuff we were talking about earlier, that the search and the finding, uh, and to tie it in with the Alan Watts quote about if you figure out who you are, you're fucked. I mean, I think that's, searching for things, it is the search that's important. Like if you find the thing, then what? Right? Then you're just gonna either find something else, or you're gonna be you're not gonna have a point.
Yeah.
Right. um and Yeah, but I think there are many ways to search for being human that are not violent. And I
That's
think
good. Yeah.
actually, I think it's stories. I think it's a lot of the stories that we tell that make people think there needs to be violence involved in that. Like you need to conquer something to become your full self,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Do you
which I
think you
guess I mean, that makes me think of like Sufism, right? And the fact that the battles for Sufis, the battles in the Quran are they're battles of the mind and the spirit, right? They're not literal battles. So the things that we're conquering are the things that are in us.
wow. That is really important. Yeah, the Sufi, the battle is of the mind and spirit, not literal, physical, not physical. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's really important because that's like all language is metaphoric, you know. And then back to the Trump thing. Well, bloodbath, is it literal or metaphoric? You know, well, there already
yeah.
was blood on January 6th, but he just knows how to rile you up with words. And he's a
Yeah.
master at the conflict thing. Why don't we close out with this archive one? Because I'd love you really brought it up early, and then we'll plan a part two and get a lot deeper into all these other aspects. But it applies to this. The word archive is 1400 etymologically mean keep safe, free from harm.
Mm-hmm.
200 years later, it's what we think of an archive, a record preserved as evidence.
Mm.
So Egyptians would put stuff in their coffin with them.
Yeah.
But, the basic two questions, and I'm going to keep blabbing on and on to set it up, but is archiving more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archive? So this is Charles Baudelaire. If you try to make a statement long and deep and rich, it will age very fast. If you try to only own the day you're talking, it will last forever. It reminds me of
That's
David
amazing.
Lee. Yeah, that's an amazing quote. It reminds me of that comes from History of Forgetting by Norman Klein. And David Lee Roth nailed it. He said, here today, gone later today. But isn't the point of life to be here now, like Ram Dass?
Mm-hmm.
So Wyndham Lewis says artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future.
Yes. Yeah.
If the whole point is to be here now, then why do we have to collect stuff? Well, me and you come from that sense. Libraries are important. I go to a library every day, and I love the fact that the future has said burn all the libraries and museums, but I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah.
But I do see this point of why did humans think we got to collect stuff, and not live in the moment. So there's a little push and pull there, and I'm curious your thoughts. Basically, is archiving more innate or more invented? Yeah, and just any thoughts on this whole thing?
I'm going to take the second part first.
Yeah.
or at least, yeah, I'm going to read. I think the idea that the the archive is the past is false, because when I'm interacting with any of these things, it's the present, right? Every time I read a section of Finnegan's Wake, it's different, it's changeable. I've changed. Every time I read Proust, I'm a different person. I'm experiencing his experience of that same experience of being a different person, right? Uh, and so to me, an archive is a really a living, breathing thing. Um, there's so when I was in France just recently, I spent a chunk of time in Vichy, and there's an amazing mediathek there called the Mediathek Valery Larbaud, who Valery Larbaud is a benefactor of Joyce and Beckett. He was one of the translators of Ulysses into French. Um, and so they're a library, but they also have a huge collection of music and films, and they do, lots of community events. And one of the things I love about this library is they play music. They play music pretty loud, and they play not music you would expect in a library. The first time I ever went in there, they were playing Can. And I was like, I'm in a library and Can is blasting. And they're like old guys playing chess here, they're like little kids running around. And it blew my mind. It was a totally different experience of a library.
Wow.
And that, Can, I was actually like a recent release of Can archival tapes. So it was like archival music playing in a place that had, these archives, but it felt so alive, so like current and breathing. Yeah, that to me that's an archive.
That's an amazing thing, because it is what I call reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people.
Yeah,
It's a living organism. It's
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's really beautiful what you said. It's a living, breathing thing. So, Colin, do you have plans for your own archives? I'm sure you've got whatever kind of forms of your own films and installation. You got books there in back of you. Any plans for you? Like, if you die, do your loved ones just know what to do, or they just say, okay, is there any plan?
There's not, I think, and I have been thinking, the past couple of years more about this. I had been for many years kind of moving from house to house and sort of different transient, not like totally transient, but we have a house now that we own and we're living in, and so I'm more able to sort of think about that. But I definitely think, if I were to die, my family would be completely overwhelmed with what to do with my archive. So yeah, I do need to devote some time to that.
And
That's a current project.
it's interesting because the digital world is so, the details aren't really known, because in researching this archive project, I've learned that people go, well, I've got it stored on hard drives. I goes, well, the pros say you have to replace the hard drive every 10 years and test it every year. It's like, people go, I've had hard drives for 20 years, and then what do you do? Put like 400 of my interviews since COVID started on YouTube. What if they shut YouTube down? You know,
Absolutely.
and you put on archive.org, and then they go, well, what if they shut archive.org down? What if they just shut the whole internet down? Oh no,
Yeah.
they won't do that. So though books, Mahler may said everything ends up will last in a book. Books do last longer than hard drives.
That is for sure.
And then you see the Clara Bow film was found last week in a parking lot in Iowa that they thought was lost. 16 millimeter, it's probably 16 millimeter film, maybe 35, but it still is playable,
Amazing. Yeah, those are some of my favorite stories, when they like
Yeah.
finding those bits of Metropolis in the abandoned museum in Buenos Aires,
Yeah.
like 12 years ago now, or the Passion of Joan of Arc. The finding of these things is
Yeah.
stunning to me. Yeah.
Well, anyways, this whole thing has been stunning. Colin, thank you so much for your time and energy. I'm so grateful. And you
Thank
really
you,
are
Jerry.
concise and articulate. And I look forward to part 2. So thank you. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Cheers.